Very, very welcome to this webinar from Sleip, where we want to talk about the use of objective gait analysis in the racing world. And we have some very distinguished guests that you'll meet throughout this webinar. But I will actually start by just saying hi and then asking a few questions to the audience, just so we know a little bit who you guys are, where you're tuning in from, and what you work with. So my name is Elin Hernlund. I am a veterinarian. I'm also a researcher in equine biomechanics and one of the founders of the company Sleip. And I will be hosting this webinar and asking questions. And full disclosure, I've already told the participants that I am actually not very familiar with racing horses. I come from the equestrian world and work with a lot of leisure and sports horses, but not with racing horses. And the racing industry in Sweden is very small. So we have a lot of standardbred racing trotters, but quite few thoroughbreds. But it's, of course, a huge industry in the rest of the world, and an industry that, interestingly, is very tech adoptive, I think. So if you look at horse industries in general, we are very late to adopt technology, but racing industry for sure is an exception. And there is a lot of very interesting tech that is being adopted into the racing world, and objective gait analysis is one of those technologies. So I will start by running a bit of a poll for all of you guys who are listening out there. So if you look at your screens, I think you will see a question that just asks simply where you are from. And I can see, thanks for voting. This is great. I can see that 50% have now answered. So if the rest of you out there want to tell us where you're from, we'd be very happy. And Europe and North America is in the lead, I can tell you. We have Middle East, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and actually South America. No one calling in from Africa yet, but that might happen later during the webinar, who knows? So we have 82%, 83%, that have answered. I will end the poll and I will share the results for everyone to see. So if you scroll down here, you'll see that Europe comes first. And this is the big challenge, of course, also of keeping or hosting webinar for the entire world, that the time zones are, of course, quite different. And we're very, very grateful for everyone, also from the panel who joins in. You can see that also the audience has a big spread. Okay, so I will go to the next question, and I will ask you about if you have a role in racing, what is your primary role in the racing industry? And for me, that would be none. So I'm really glad to be here to learn more. And we have 50% have answered now, so please click away. And there's a lot of treating and attending veterinarians out there who are watching the webinar right now. Quite some regulatory vets. We have some trainers. We have some regulatory officials that are non-vets also. And then equine welfare specialists or program leads and researchers and students, and quite a lot of others. So I'm very curious who you guys are. I will now end the poll and I will share the results for you guys to see. And for everyone out there, I know you have different backgrounds, and if you have questions, just ask them from your heart, and you can ask them in the Q&A of this webinar along the way, and we'll try to answer both in written format, but also to maybe pick up some of these questions for the second half of this webinar, which will be a sort of panel discussion. Last question for the audience is, what's your interest in objective gait analysis? If you have one, but I do guess you have one since you're in this webinar. I'm very happy for that. And while asking this question, I can also, of course, say something about the history of gait analysis, that the biomechanical research behind this thing that we measure, or the motion pattern that we measure, is actually quite old. For at least 30 years, this research has been going, and the parameters that Sleip measure and output are nothing that is unique to Sleip, but it's really based on a lot of old biomechanical studies that connect the motion pattern to weight-bearing lameness. But in populations of active horses, athletically active horses, we do have a lot of these asymmetries. And this very difficult question of when a lameness or an asymmetry becomes more associated to weight bearing, that shows us that there is a lameness. That's a very difficult one. So I will now share the results from this last question. And a lot of you out there who are listening right now do have interest in the real world use of objective gait analysis in racing jurisdictions, and how data can support regulatory decisions, trainer-vet collaborations, international approaches, and then some others. So please ask us questions during this webinar, and we'll try to answer the best we can. So let's see. I think you now can see the answer to these questions. So let's get going with the first section of our program. We actually do have some cases that we want to share from around the world, how objective gait analysis is being used. And quite suitingly, first out is Dr. Bronte Forbes from the Hong Kong Jockey Club. And Bronte, you are actually a biomechanical researcher like me. And I know you recently published some papers and that you have a PhD in equine biomechanics from the Royal Veterinary College. Originally educated in Perth, right? And then you've worked in equine practice in both Australia, Ireland, Singapore, and Hong Kong. And then for the last 4 years, I know that you have moved into a regulatory role, and you're a very important person for the Hong Kong Jockey Club. So my first question to you, Bronte, is really how you've been using gait analysis as part of the regulatory routines in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong, of course, is known for its very high-level tech adoption, and also the closeness of how you work, I think, with trainers, and you're quite, well, let's say, geographically limited population of racehorses. So I would love to hear from you, how you work with gait analysis in practice, and what impact it has had so far.
Firstly, thank you much for the invite and also the introduction. I wish I was more of a researcher in biomechanics, but don't have the time, unfortunately. I guess to answer the question, to start with a little bit of my background with gait analysis. When I was working in Singapore, we used IMUs quite commonly in clinical side of practice, and we found that very useful. Whereas in Singapore, we had a dual role. So we were clinical and regulatory veterinarians for the racing club. And we realized that there was great potential to use objective analysis of a horse's gait in a regulatory setting. However, with IMUs, as everyone knows, there's a need to instrument the horse, and it takes some time to instrument the horse and get a result. Whereas with regulatory decisions, certainly in the jurisdictions I've worked in, those decisions usually are time sensitive and have to be made in a very short period of time. So this is where non-marker video gait analysis, such as Sleip, has really come into its fore for us. And we've started to use it a lot more in regulatory decisions. So one of the main areas we use it is to document horses and to follow horses over time. So as we know, not all horses, especially racehorses, move perfectly symmetrically or perfectly normally. And the decision has to be made, has that horse changed in its gait? Is that horse fit to compete? So when you're dealing with a number of veterinarians looking at the horses, and we have two sites now, we have a site in China and a site in Hong Kong. It's important to have some method of being able to document how that horse moves and give you some confidence that the gait you're seeing is normal, or alert you that maybe there's a change in that horse's gait. So that's one of the main things we've been using it for. We also use it, I guess, as a digital second opinion, for want of a better terminology. So if we are second guessing ourselves, or if we're unsure, it's nice to have a gait analysis to determine that. But Interesting, what's also quite useful for us with the Sleip specifically is that it's a very standardized video recording. So we can share that among our team, and it's easily shared among our team. And the video recordings are standardized, so they have to have a certain number of strides, and the video has to be of good enough quality. So that's been very useful for us in that regard as well. So the main time we would probably use it in a regulatory setting is if we are failing a veterinary exam, to document that. And that's often quite useful when we speak with trainers or with stable vets, so that everyone can see what we have seen. Because as everyone will know, a horse can trot differently in the morning as it does in the afternoon.
And I think both you and I have been working with these IMU systems, which are really great objective gait analysis systems as well. They're a little bit more time consuming, of course. But I think maybe, as you say here, one of the main things is that you might get a recording and then, getting someone else to look at those graphs. The data itself is super useful and can be used in many ways, I think. But just the visual documentation of these slow motion videos, I do think they oftentimes help the communication. And when you do this, do you like if your site in mainland China and your Hong Kong site, do you have a standardized way of doing it, and do you regularly send data and videos to each other, or how does that work?
Well, one of the more recent updates that Sleip has done is to allow us to have share all the recordings. So we have one account where all of our veterinary officers are on that account, and if one veterinary officer records a horse, we'll all get the alert, and we can all look at that horse. So it's shared very easily. I think, and as we all know, and as the research has showed us, veterinarians using classical lameness grades, we're very different in how we assess an individual horse. I think this is helping us to slowly become more consistent, because we can all discuss a case, we can all look at the same video and determine at what level that horse is fit to compete or to pass or fail a veterinary examination. Whereas previously we would bring our vets down from China, or we would go up there and you would look at a couple of horses each. Now it gives you that opportunity to, I guess, educate each other on what we all consider is acceptable or not.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because as you say, research has really shown that we do differ. And we actually do have a question from the audience here, from Russell Malton. Considering how many horses have asymmetrical gaits, how do you decide what is normal or what is acceptable to race? And I think, Russell, that we'll get back to this question throughout this webinar in very many forms. But maybe, Bronte, you already have a comment on this here, because you're already touching on, that there is a huge normal variability, but a variability in gait that we have, and that might, it's the difficulty of finding the ones that are at high risk. I
think this is a very important point, and something close to my heart. I think we have to be very careful when we use gait analysis, not to use it as a determinant of if a horse is fit to race or not. I'm a strong believer that it should be a tool in our toolbox. In my opinion, I know there's some debate within the field, but in my opinion, asymmetry does not mean lameness, although lameness often has asymmetry, but asymmetry does not necessarily mean lameness. And we need to all be very clear of that, I think, and it's important for everyone to understand that. So I'm going to borrow one of Professor Keegan's metaphors, in that it's like a thermometer. If you take a horse's temperature and the temperature's high, that's not a diagnosis, and you need to then clinically assess that horse and determine, is that a significant temperature? Does it need further investigation? Does it need further treatment? And I think that's exactly what gait analysis does for us. It says this horse's gait is more asymmetric to the right or more asymmetric to the left, and then you need to determine if that's significant or not. So I think that's one thing that I would really like to see, and I think we've discussed this previously. It's particularly important when you're talking to racing administrators to get them to understand that, because there is no threshold for fitness to compete. And it was something when I first started with this many years ago, I thought there would be, and this was going to be nice and easy, and there'd be a number we could look at from the IMUs, and we can say, no, that horse can't compete, or yes, that horse can compete. But I now don't believe that that's true. Maybe one day we'll get there, but given the complexities of lameness and fitness to compete, I don't think that will ever occur.
No, but that's a great point, and I think that probably answers some of Russell's concerns there. And if you compare it to, for example, the chips that could be implanted in horses that could give us digital readings of temperature, as you say, also actual body temperature. Of course, that data could help us out to figure out early on if we have horses with infectious disease, like we had the herpes virus outbreak in Europe, for example, in sports horses. And I know that this data, even though there are no real thresholds for a particular disease, it still helps us out to find the right individuals in time. So do you even have an example, Bronte, of, did it help with early detection at some point using gait analysis for you guys in Hong Kong?
I think the potential for taking a single measurement and having an early detection of an injury, I don't think we'll realise. Where I think it will be very useful is monitoring horses longitudinally over time. I've really moved my mind shift to, again, my hope was that we could put an IMU on a horse, and as you said, that gives you a lot more information, and we could put an IMU on and we could say, well, this horse is probably going to do its tendon, or it's probably going to be lame post-racing, but I now don't believe that. But I think monitoring horses over time has massive potential to see if that horse's gait changes, and that may be a decrease in asymmetry or an increase in asymmetry. And I think that information entered into a risk analysis, so a horse's risk analysis, which is something we're getting quite keen on in Hong Kong. I think that will be very useful. So that single piece of information, the longitudinal measuring of that horse's gait, added to the other risk factors of a horse, I think is where it's going to help us with early detection.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Bronte. Great insights, and we'll get back to you in the panel discussion. I also urge everyone out there who is just as geeky as me to read Bronte's scientific publications on the risk of racing in the left and the right direction, for example, which is a great publication that I read with a lot of interest. You'll find it online in one of these scientific databases. So we're going to move over to Dr. Toby Koenig, who joins us from Saudi Arabia. Toby, you are, unlike me, very, very familiar with racing also, and have also been Chief Veterinary Officer at Racing New South Wales and in Racing Australia. So Toby, I know Saudi Arabia has a really quickly growing racing industry. You have a big nationally growing industry, and I also know you have a very big international race in February, the Saudi Cup, where you do have a lot of horses that fly in internationally to Saudi Arabia. So we would love to hear from you, Toby, your experiences using objective gait analysis in particular in relation to this event.
Thank you, Elin. And yeah, good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation to be here. It's a pleasure to be able to participate in a conversation like this. And just before I start, I think I would echo a lot of what Bronte said there. But one thing in particular is that Bronte said asymmetry does not mean lameness. I would really echo that and repeat it. You'll probably hear me say longitudinal too many times as I speak, but that collection of longitudinal data over time has shown great potential, particularly in Saudi Arabia. So how I'd like to address this, I'll talk briefly. Well, I'll try to talk briefly about how we've begun integrating objective gait analysis, specifically by using the Sleip app in our regulatory veterinary practices, which we first introduced in a broader sense here in the second half of last year, second half of 2024. And then exactly how that integrated into the 2025 Saudi Cup, which was my first Saudi Cup since joining the Jockey Club of Saudi Arabia, and how it fits into the broader strategic vision, as well as some of the lessons that we've learned that may resonate with veterinarians in other jurisdictions. So I often find it's important for myself and for my team to revisit the core principles that I think are crucial to veterinary regulation, which I would like to think guide our mission here as veterinarians at the Jockey Club of Saudi Arabia. I'd like to think that 3 consistent pillars apply broadly to our work. Primarily, they're focused around the welfare of our horses, the safety of all of our participants, and thirdly, but no less importantly, confidence and integrity in the industry here in Saudi Arabia that pertains to confidence in our decision making around that world that can extend to wagering and confidence in regulation. So the principles that I always come back to, they form the foundation of our regulatory decisions, and I always feel to stress, and Bronte has touched on this, that we're not looking for reasons, and I had this conversation with Elin recently, we're not looking for reasons to prevent horses from racing. It's quite the opposite of that. We aim to ensure that when a horse races, it's suitable to do so and can do so at the best of its ability on any given day, because that's what supports safety, transparency, and that will be the long-term sustainability of the industry. So all of that here in Saudi Arabia is aligned with our 2030 strategic plan and seeks to develop Saudi Arabia as a premier racing jurisdiction in an international and a domestic sense. There's a tremendous amount of growth here in Saudi Arabia. So the Saudi Cup 2025 provided us with an opportunity to implement objective gait analysis, specifically Sleip, at a scale within a high-performance regulatory environment. As you can see, there's some pretty large numbers there. In the lead up to the event, we inspected north of 250 horses domiciled domestically in Saudi Arabia. And where possible and deemed necessary, that allowed the development of that longitudinal data set to assess any changes over time as a horse progresses through some training regime. The results were very informative. We found that around 25% of the horses that underwent inspection were required to undergo additional clinical veterinary scrutiny by our international team of clinical veterinarians. And ultimately, around 10% of those horses were not permitted to race at the Saudi Cup international meetings for a variety of reasons. When you view that from a certain perspective, those numbers can be concerning to horsemen and owners, but we like to look at it and think that they create an opportunity, allowing particularly domestically early intervention where possible, and to engage in more informed conversations with our trainers and our participants alike. These are practices are something that we've sought to implement more broadly now across our domestic seasons, extending back into last year, which we can discuss as the discussion progresses. But I think extending beyond the domestic scene, where and Bronte's already alluded to this, where the introduction of a technology like Sleip really comes into its own is the ability to receive multiple and timely submissions from international participants. That's been a huge benefit to the Saudi Cup. It's obviously crucial to allow for the regulatory assessment and decision making to commence well in advance of the international travel. And it's supported by multi-layer regulatory approach, including medication declarations, approved veterinarian inspections, and Sleip is just an adjunct to those processes that already exist. So we'd like to approach, where's my slide going? Yeah, we like to approach, this is a shared responsibility. Trainers, particularly our international participants, have engaged well with the process going back to last year and are becoming increasingly familiar with the technology in multiple jurisdictions. They generally, I find that the transparency is appreciated, and the use of video visuals, particularly when we're not all in the same place, has often helped to reduce conflict and disagreement, and as Bronte alluded to, allows for collaboration of multiple individuals to assess an individual horse over time. So it's given us a platform for dialogue. In many cases, mainly domestically, the data that we see supports a return to racing decision. I mean, in others, it's reinforced the need to take a step back and reassess further. But the value here is not just in exclusion of horses from racing. In Saudi Arabia, it's been a great source of guidance and education. So it's just as important to convey that from a regulatory perspective, objective tools like Sleip, as Bronte said, do not replace our clinical decision-making and assessment. They do allow us to support our decisions with consistent and renewable information over time. So again, we're not looking for reasons to prevent horses from racing. It's the inverse is quite true. What we're doing to seek, we're seeking to ensure that the three pillars that I always come back to aim for safety, confidence in decision making, and ultimately fairness for everyone in. So, as a jurisdiction in Saudi Arabia, we're committed to and seeking IFHA Part 1 standards. So we're on the journey to Part 1, which is the highest level of international jurisdictions. But for that to be meaningful, we must engage with the shared global challenges that all jurisdictions face. So first, we need systems that allow for the data to move with the horses as they go from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Secondly, we need to build trust with how the information is interpreted. And thirdly, we need infrastructure, digital, veterinary, procedural, to support continuity of that information. So a horse that travels from Hong Kong to Saudi Arabia, as we experienced this year, or from the UK to Dubai, the data sets that are being developed around such horses may well prove invaluable in the future. And conversations regarding commonalities in protocols and harmonisation are advancing. So promoting the assurance of welfare and integrity we're very much at the beginning of that, despite there being decades of gone ahead in leaps and bounds in recent times. Just finally, so here at the Jockey Club of Saudi Arabia, from that with a big international meeting like the Saudi Cup, which offers some $40 million in prize money over 2 days, we seek to play an important and informed role in the discussion in this rapidly developing space, in infrastructure, in expectations, but also in our role on the global stage. And we have to acknowledge our international responsibility. So to that end, Sleip has become just one of the tools that we use, but we found that it's one of the tools we use to help us keep track of risk, of change, of opportunity. And it's important to acknowledge that it's not an answer on its own. As Bronte said, it's one of the tools that we have. It's an objective support, one that enhances rather than replaces our clinical judgment and regulatory decision-making. I've often found that it has really given me support where I may even be questioning myself at times. So I'd reinforce that last comment. The Jockey Club of Saudi Arabia, we're growing very, very quickly here, and objective tools like Sleip help us manage that growth with integrity, with foresight, but ultimately it's a support to what we're trying to implement. It doesn't replace the individuals involved, and it certainly doesn't replace our clinical judgment. So I'll leave it there. I'm happy to explore any other aspects that anyone would like to ask about, but yeah, I very much look forward to the panel discussion, and it's nice to hear some of the things that we're talking about being echoed in other jurisdictions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Toby. That was super interesting. And I'm just going to pick up some questions from the audience here. And Abi Manu is asking, stating quite correctly that there might be network problems in the stables when you're working, and especially during busy pre-race periods. With a lot of trot-ups, this can, be quite some operational, challenges to this. But I think you already pinpointed here that this opens up a dialogue. You can do it, partly well before the race, which I understand that you really used in your model here. So getting that data in quite well before the race so that you can open up, using the data and the videos, conversations with the trainers and the treating veterinarians. And I think that to me, it sounds just very logical. I hope, the rest of the regulatory world in equestrian disciplines would follow this example. And could you tell us, have there been a lot of technical challenges? Because I know you've been screening horses from really all over the world and getting that data back to you guys.
Yeah, I think we have a similar setup to what Bronte referred to, in that we have multiple veterinarians that have access to all of the information that's uploaded to our platform. We have faced some of the challenges from the question. Thank you for the question. We don't always have access to the network here in Saudi Arabia. Sometimes that access can be 5G and very fast. Sometimes we don't have access to a network and Wi-Fi, but I found that I can make multiple recordings. Those recordings then are uploaded once I have network access, and I can have a rapid number of results and analysis come back in time. That's because we've implemented it not just in this longitudinal sense. We also utilize the technology when horses present to race, if there's any need to inspect a horse when it presents to the racecourse, and indeed as part of our post-race veterinary inspections, as Bronte referred to, so that we have a record of any findings. But again, so that we can build that longitudinal database for the horses that we're seeing time and time again. We have a relatively large population compared to some parts of the world. There's around 4,000 horses in training at any one time. But we do see, as we only race in the evenings at particular times of the year in Riyadh from October until March when the weather is cooler, and only on Thursdays, Fridays and Saturdays, we find that the horses do tend to represent at a fairly regular schedule, and that longitudinal database can be built from there. But from the questioner's perspective, absolutely, I find sometimes we don't have network support, but I'm able to make recordings, and those do get uploaded to the platform in time.
Yeah, that's great. So having that, time or planning this well before the event apparently has its really positive sides. And we have some questions just to clarify. Meg is asking here why we call this longitudinal data. So of course, monitoring one individual or several individuals over time, I think that's what I would call longitudinal data. So just more this over time, multiple measurements of one individual horse that we know from research is really, really interesting. And both Debbie and Nigel here are also asking about this way of monitoring over time. And Nigel points out that it's very common, I think, as a regulatory vet, I guess, here to hear that the horse has always moved like this. And if we can show that it has changed, it would be super, useful to, have a common view of the horse, I guess, historically, and what is meant by if there is a change or not. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I think to echo again that asymmetry is not lameness. I feel very strongly about that, like I believe Bronte does. Lameness for me, I like to think of lameness as a function of a pain response. That's not akin to or congruent with asymmetry. And we see a lot of variations of normal.
Bronte, please jump in.
If I can jump in, you asked me for an example before, and I guess a good example of this is we have one racing jurisdiction now that will bring us gait analysis before the horse even arrives, and will send it to us and just say, we want you to have a look at this so you know how this horse moves before it arrives. So, people have already picked up on the fact that if they can let the regulators know how horses move and show that it's normal, for want of a better word, for that horse, that it's a positive and that assists the horse, as Toby said, it assists us to help the horse to run, as opposed to a tool to try and remove a horse from running. And also with the use of it longitudinally, I think now, and whether it's the ease of use, I think it's being used quite commonly, or a lot more commonly now, in clinicians. So they're used to using it, trainers are used to seeing it, but also there's a fair number of jurisdictions. I know Toby uses it, we use it. It's used in Australia there with Grace in New South Wales. So a lot of us now are using it and are willingly sharing those measurements with each other as the horses move around. So it's not uncommon for a horse to race in the UK, go to Dubai, come to Hong Kong, then go down to Australia, and we can share that along the way, so that we know how that horse normally moves.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear that there's this international network of data being shared between jurisdictions. We will move on. We have some more interesting questions in the Q&A, and I hope we can get to those during the panel discussion. I will just quickly say something about Debbie's, well thought comment here that asymmetry does mean that we do have an asymmetry in the musculoskeletal system, and that of course can be a risk factor. Yes, and I think that's partly also what has been said here, that the data moving forward is going to be very important, and that when we have a high degree of asymmetry, we know we need to give that additional attention to that horse, and we need to have give that attention in a dialogue between trainer and treating vet and regulatory vet. So next we're moving on to Dr. Amy Hawthorn from the BHA, British Horse Racing Authority. Amy, thank you so much for joining from the UK. Time zone is a little bit better, I think, for you than for the rest of the team.
It certainly is.
Yeah. And I know you've been in equine clinical practice for quite some time, and now work with a very strong and passionate focus at the BHA, and have been trialing Sleip. And while you get your presentation going, Amy, I will disclose that me and Per from Sleip, we were visiting the BHA quite early on in this process, and I was dead scared that you would be looking for one single threshold to let a horse race or not. And I know I'm very impressed with how all of these three examples, I think, show a very thoughtful process of introducing these types of measurements in the racing regulations. So we're very welcome, Amy.
Thank you. It's reassuring to hear from Toby and Bronte, because I think a lot of what I'm about to say echoes their thoughts, and I'll try to not repeat the same views and just add what I can from our experiences. The first thing I'd say is here in Britain, we're a little bit behind Bronte and Toby in that we haven't actually used it for any regulatory decision making yet. We've been trialing it alongside our pre-race examination process. We've just come to the end of a year-long trial where we've used Sleip at our all-card trot-ups, which is when we examine every runner at a racecourse. We've done that at 100 all-card trot-ups, and reviewed the information we've got and listened to our participants to see what they think of gait analysis as part of regulation. I think an interesting nuance of British racing is that our horsemen and the racecourses have quite a say in regulation. And so it's really very much a collaboration, what we're doing here. And we want to take the trainers along for the ride with us to collaborate, rather than just to be heavy-handed with regulation. I suppose there were three questions we were trying to answer from the trial. The first is it safe and practical for us on race day? Secondly, are we content that it's relatively accurate on the British thoroughbred population? And thirdly, what do the racing participants, in particular the trainers, think of the analysis? So I'll go over a couple of observations we had, just in addition to what Toby and Bronte have already said. So in terms of, is it safe and practical on a race day for us? We've got a slightly different setup in that we've got 59 race courses in Britain. There's 26 veterinary officers working across those race courses. And we've only recently been able to establish a dedicated trot-up strip at every race course to use for pre-race examination. And they're very much of varying practicality, I suppose is a term I'd use, depending on the race course stables and how easy it is to install these strips. So safety is a big factor for us. In my opinion, the app is the only form of gait analysis that would be safe for us to use in British racing. We trialed it freehand and on a tripod, and found that the video quality is equally good, and freehand is considerably safer. We found the analysis and the devices stood up to all forms of British weather, which was impressive. From very bright sunlight to lashing rain, we still found the analysis to be good. We found that the app was unaffected by slopes, but that it was affected by a camber. I don't know whether that's something Bronte or Toby have trialed it with, but for me that wasn't a major issue, because so long as you've got that knowledge, you can then adjust your interpretation of the analysis accordingly. For us, we found that the most useful thing, as I think Bronte alluded to, is the high quality video you get as part of the analysis is so useful, in addition to the objective grade or the categorical grade that we're assigning to each horse. And for us, between such a massive veterinary officer team, that's fundamental for consistency and decision making across the team, and also for continuity of monitoring these horses. So that was where we saw the biggest advantage. If I move on to the accuracy of the data, I think in summary we felt that it is highly accurate if the quality of the video that's obtained is good enough, and that was variable across our race courses. The conclusion moving forward with using the app in our decision making is going to be that we will record horses trotting up and down twice, which is double the amount we normally see as veterinary officers. And we see that as a positive step, not only for the human eye, because obviously it gives the veterinary officer a second look at a horse that gives you a better understanding of the way the horse is moving. But we found that the quality of the analysis was higher if you took 2 passes of a trot-up strip, which I think is pretty intuitive, really, for 2 reasons. One is there's obviously more strides included, and secondly, my experience is that horses tend to settle more on the second trot. And one of the big problems we have is that horses are not trotted regularly at home, so they're often quite excitable when they're trotted on the race course. They often get ahead of their handler and then are naturally moving laterally down the trot-up strip, which is unhelpful to both the human eye and to Sleip. And I've been pleasantly surprised by how accurate the analysis is despite this. I think if I move on, this may go some way to answering some of the questions in the chat. This is the lameness grading system we use in Britain. And to give you a rough idea of where we start to ask questions, if a horse is grade 1 out of 5, we record it on our vet system, but we don't tend to ask any other questions. The horse is allowed to run. The trainer is notified that we've identified that grade, but they are allowed to run. If it's a grade 2, then we start asking more questions and examining the horse in greater depth. They're sent to be warmed up and reassessed on the trot-up strip, and then potentially on the racing surface as well. And at that stage, we take into account veterinary history and the opinion of the trainer as well. So grade 2 is where we're most interested. Grade 3 is an immediate withdrawal from racing. And I think it's very unusual. We see grade 4s or 5s. They tend to occasionally occur from injury in transit or foot abscess or something along those lines. I've just put in, for those people that aren't familiar with Sleip colour scheme, along the bottom, this is the colours from left to right in order of severity that Sleip grades asymmetry. And here is I apologise, I'm not that familiar with making graphs. This is my attempt at a visual of our review, but this is an example from our trial of 25 horses I randomly selected from one trot-up, and I've ordered them from left to right in severity of lameness that the veterinary officers identified on the day. Just to clarify, so there's only one horse that we graded as 2 out of 5 out of 25. And you can see that the asymmetry colour scheme that Sleip attaches to each analysis is fairly consistent. There's certainly good agreement between our grading system and the severity of asymmetry, which we were pleased to see. with a rough equivalence of yellow being a grade 1 out of 5. And then in other reviews, I saw that orange or red could be 2 out of 5 and greater. So that hopefully provides a little bit of clarity on our grading system in Britain. I thought it might be helpful just to show a video. This is an example from one trot up we did. I think there's a slight lag to this video, which I apologise for, but I still think it's of use. So this horse was a horse that's a known poor mover, which is a term used here in Britain. We're trying to move away from it, but it does keep popping up. And I guess the summary of what that means to us is a horse with low-grade lameness that's chronic and appears to be present over a number of months or years. This horse was known to move with a poor gait by the trainer, but they weren't able to tell us on which legs that was the case. Our vets that looked at this horse felt that it had a grade 1 out of 5 on its right fore and right hind, which I think is shared by the analysis of Sleip. If I just move on, this the video we've just seen is summarized on the right of this slide, where you can see there's a low grade right fore and right hind asymmetry that's been identified. Interestingly, this horse just 1 month before had been analysed as part of our trial, and you can see there's a difference. I mean, it's a subtle difference, to be fair, but there is a difference in this horse's gait. And I think it's a good example of a case where you can monitor subtle changes in a horse that the trainer hasn't picked up themselves. And this would help for us to have a more meticulous approach to changes in gait. This certainly would enhance our recording system, because this wasn't something that was recorded so accurately in our categorical grading system in our clinical notes. The other thing we were really interested in Britain, and I'm sure there's other jurisdictions that share the same difficulties, is that much of our flat racing population, we believe, have a low-grade bilateral or quadrilateral issue. And we obviously, with Sleip assessing symmetry, we were concerned that it wouldn't be so useful in these cases. And for us, it's the one shortfall of Sleip. This example here is a horse that's on our vet system we described as a quadrilateral poor mover with a choppy restricted action. When 12 of our veterinary officers assessed the original video, 5 of those felt that the analysis was not representative of the gait at all, and the rest of those 12 felt there were some shortfalls in the analysis. I don't think there's any surprise. Obviously, the app measures vertical displacement of landmarks and not stride length. But what I would say is we were pleasantly surprised by the quality of the video that accompanies the analysis, and we felt that regardless of what the analysis shows, just having that video to create a longitudinal video library using the same wording as Toby and Bronte is so valuable and really does enhance the wordy description we've been using for these cases. It is so subjective. So while it's a shortfall, we still think that the app provides great progress for monitoring these poor movers in Britain. Finally, I'll stop wittering on shortly, but I wanted to share this because I thought it would be of interest to see where other jurisdictions are focusing their use of Sleip, and I think we've heard a bit about that already. But our plan is to record all horses where a lameness of 1 out of 5 or greater has been identified by the human eye. And then we're really focused on this collaboration attempt with our participants. So when that's been identified, the video will be shared immediately or as soon as possible with the trainer and the treating vet if consent is given by the trainer. And we also will use video invitations of Sleip for our suitability to race protocol, which is essentially the protocol used on horses that are withdrawn from racing for lameness or other orthopedic issues. We're also going to have a real drive to encourage trainers to submit videos voluntarily of any horse they feel or they've identified as a horse with an unusual gait. And this is something we already do using WhatsApp videos, but Sleip would be much neater in terms of filing the videos. And obviously we also get to see the analysis as well, which is of great interest to us. I think I'll stop talking there. I know it's been a bit of a monologue.
That is wonderful, Amy. I think this is such a great example of how you do this with a lot of a very thoughtful process, I think, in general, and really trying to understand. And I think for us at Sleip, this is just as important as the use itself, that it is well planted in the community, that people accept to do it. And also, as I think your case here at the end shows, the horse that had like grayish colored legs, so asymmetry that is quite small, but a little bit all over. It just shows us how important it is, and I'm echoing Toby and Bronte here again, to use this as a complement to the veterinary visual assessment as well, because as you would say, a typical poor mover might not actually be very asymmetrical. So even though these parameters that we measure from the video are very well related to forces and sort of force asymmetry, so it means that the landing force that the horse has, so impact between horse and ground, you can imagine how that would be if you would have pain in all four legs. Then you would move very stiff with very short and sticky strides. And part of that we could see in the longitudinal measurements still. So again, thinking about the usefulness over time, that horses might actually become more short-strided. That data we could also provide, but that doesn't mean they would flag up as being very asymmetrical. So given how the biomechanics behind these tool works, we will not be able to throw out the vet, and we, of course, no one wants to do that, but it's just very imperative, I think, to highlight that, and that this is really, really important, that the measurements themselves can give us information on population levels and changes over time in individuals, but you need to use the data together with the visual assessment for sure.
Yeah, could I just add one more point?
Go ahead, Amy.
I share Toby and Bronte's opinions about asymmetry and lameness, and they're not always the same thing. But one thing I would say is an area we've been tightening the screw on somewhat in Britain is these quadrilateral or bilateral paw movers, where we've been asking ourselves the question, that we may be satisfied that they're not an increased risk of a catastrophic injury, but we have been asking the question, is this a welfare issue? And we have stopped a few horses running this year based, even with a thorough veterinary investigation that has satisfied us about the risk to the animal, we've still stopped the horse from running based on welfare. And this is obviously an emotive issue and a very subjective issue, and something we struggle with, and we feel it does cause some tension in the regulatory vet trainer relationship. And so for us, being able to share these high quality videos and to show the difference in everything from the horse's stride and where it's being restricted through to the horse's head carriage and how that can be associated with pain of impact, I think will be a really valuable tool in communication. Yeah. We've been doing it so far on less high quality videos, and so I hope that will actually assist us, even if the analysis isn't the main form of assistance in these cases.
I completely agree, and I know my research background is also partly on pain detection, or my brilliant co-workers in my research group do work a little bit with pain detection from video. So who knows, maybe AI will help us also with these actually emotional expressions that we can see in horses also. For now, as you guys have said, the video documentation, in general also, or looking at the horse's behavior is a very important part of what we're seeing, and potentially also a part of actually that grading system that we use for lameness, if we're good at picking up these signs. Thank you so much, Amy. We are going to move into the panel discussion part of this webinar, and I'm very happy to introduce two distinguished people from the NYRA, so the New York Racing Association, Dr. Sarah Hinchliffe, and we have Davies Klein. And Sarah, you are from the veterinary department. You're a director of the veterinary department at New York Racing Association. And I know you have a long clinical and horsey background from the veterinary life, and have worked a long time for NYRA, I think more than almost 15 years, I think. Yeah, Sarah. So very welcome. And Davies, a very good addition to this group of vets. Davies, you have an interesting background to me. You're very well planted in the equine industry, in the racing industry, and you also have a business education, as I understand it, with business management. So having these perspectives of coming both from the equine industry, working very tightly in that industry, and also coming from the business side, I know you now work as an equine biometric specialist. And that is very close to my heart also, not only looking at gait analysis data, I'm guessing, but also other biometrical data that can help us to understand these horses, just as Amy was saying here, that there is more to understand than you know, asymmetry. There is a lot of data that we can use and that we can pull to you know, make better predictions of health and welfare for horses. So I'm just going to start with asking you guys, and maybe Sarah, you can be out first. Do you see objective gait analysis data making difference in your work? And can you share some examples of that potentially?
Yeah, for sure. Similar to Amy's experience, we've been using Sleip now for a couple of years here in New York. In the pre-race out of competition exam setting, also most heavily in our vets list workers. So obviously in the US, we have a unique situation with horses being placed on the vets list that may actually come from another jurisdiction. So I've been using Sleip on these horses pre-work, post-work. If I can get videos of them actually on the track under saddle as well. And then as of the beginning of this year, we have started using the app for all of our claim jogs. So any horse in New York that is claimed will go to the test barn, and we jog those horses post-race to ensure that they're sound before they go to their new connections. So that's actually been really enlightening in there, when we see actually a fair number of horses that appear more sound to us post-race than they did pre-race, which is an interesting observation. And I'll say I see that quite a bit with vets list workers too, where they actually, the Sleip analysis shows that their asymmetry has improved post-work, which is an interesting finding.
That is a great comment, and actually, I do see a question from another Sarah here in the Q&A. If repeated assessment on a given day would be instructive, and I think what you're pointing out here, Sarah, we do see that in quite some research data, also for eventers, that as a group you do find that if you would look at a 3-day event for eventing horses, so they would first then do their dressage and then the cross country, and then they have another vet inspection. So one inspection before they go into these 2 first days of eventing, and then before the show jumping, they would then have another one. And as a group in research, we would find them to be more symmetrical, so sort of better looking in their pattern after the first two days of competition. But that's not all of them. So some of them would for sure increase. And I think those are the ones, I guess, that we should flag. So, and I guess that's the same thing for you guys in these claim races, that's an important part of even seeing what exercise would do to a horse, I'm guessing. But that's a super interesting observation. And the ones that are looking worse after the race, those are, I'm guessing, very interesting to flag. And what would happen then with these horses? Would you... the ones that would look worse, what's the procedure, or have you changed any procedures given that you now do this?
In terms of the claim jogging, right now, you know, the Sleip is more of an investigative. We're seeing how it correlates. I would say very high correlation with what we were saying was lame post race and what the Sleip is showing, probably usually orange and reds for us. Is an identifiable lameness that those horses would be voided. So they would be returned to their previous connections and put onto a vets list where they would need to work prior to being allowed to race again.
Yeah, and I love that approach. I must say that you like, okay, no, let's not make decision based on this now. When you introduce a new tool like this, and you know, these types of tools haven't been used on the scale that we're seeing that you guys in racing are doing. You first have to do what you used to do, keep your procedures, add the data to that, and then you know maybe evaluate when you have quite a big bunch of data to you know add to that procedure that you had before. Do you see, what are the biggest challenges, Sarah, for you guys at NYRA with using the technology?
Honestly, I think probably one of the biggest challenges we see, and where I don't know yet, unlike in our test barn with our void claims, we have a very nice level jog strip. When we're using this in the barn setting, you know, we may be jogging them in the shed row where it's maybe a more uneven or a softer footing versus jogging on the pavement. And I definitely think I can jog a horse literally back to back within minutes and get very different results on the pavement versus on the softer ground. I think interestingly, we have been able to correlate a decent number of those with maybe it's a soft tissue issue when they look worse on the soft ground. So I'm not sure how we utilize that yet in racing, when obviously the horses are racing over soft ground. They're not racing on the pavement. But that's been an interesting look where we're seeing, you know, literally within minutes jogging in a different, and certainly to our eye as well. Like, and I think a lot of our trainers too, when we look at horses, if they look bad in the shed row, their immediate is, oh, well, let's take them out on the pavement. They'll look better there. They may not. But again, how is that affecting what we're looking at down the road for a clinical diagnosis of what's going on with that horse? So ideally, if I've got any concerns, I really like to jog them over both surfaces. And obviously, it's a challenge in a training setting when we have hundreds of horses on the racing surface. But I do try very hard, particularly with horses that might jog up sound in hand, but then look very different with the weight of a rider. Trying to get videos of those horses with the rider on to get that perspective as well.
Those are great points, I think, and we often do get questions about, you know, the difference that you see on different surfaces, and just to, I think, just make that clear that what these technologies measure, if there is a difference, you know, that is measured, then that difference exists. So what you're saying here is that that's often, you know, evident to the eye as well. And I think from the research perspective, you know, I did my PhD on sports surfaces for sports horses, but so we do know from clinical experience that the different types of injuries would react quite differently on the different surfaces. So that gives us information. But interestingly, that data, there is so little published data on that. And I think you guys in the racing world really have a chance here to collect that type of data and to systematize and to look at the correlation to different types of specific injury sites. So showing that, well, tendon injuries, for example, might, of course, in a big population of horses, be much clearer to detect on a soft surface. That might eventually be changing, I think, the protocols of how we try to detect different things, while distal, you know, skeletal injuries might be much more apparent on the harder grounds. So we say that there is very little data to show it. So I hope you guys will collect that data and to share it with the rest of the vet community, so that we know a bit better in the future. That's really great. So we will just move over to Davies, and then we'll continue with a bit more group discussions here. So Davies, let us know what you're doing and how you see the use of objective gait analysis, and maybe also in relation to other types of technology that I guess you are meeting in your job.
Yeah, so number one, thank you guys again for having us. This is great. But I'd say over the last 3 or 4 years, when a lot of these tools have become readily available for us, we've been piloting a number of them in collaboration with a handful of trainers here at NYRA tracks that are usually based here year round. And I think a great, I guess, progression that we've seen is getting these tools in the hands of trainers and getting them comfortable with data analysis in their own way, if that makes sense. So ease of use, ease of understanding what they're actually looking at and what kind of information they're gathering from, whether using IMUs or AI tools such as Sleip, and the level of involvement we've seen, especially 3 years ago till now, has been exponential. And that begins the whole communication network as well between trainers and veterinarians alone, whether it's private or regulatory. So that's where I think a massive, progression has been that we've seen, especially with engagement between the two parties. Sarah, I don't if you want to test that as well. But yeah, so I think a large part of this is, getting this involved in trainers' hands as well, whether it is IMUs or AI tools, such as your all's platform. And hopefully we just continue to grow.
That's great, Davies. And I think I will actually invite Sarah and the rest of the panels and experts we have here today to talk a little bit about this, because it's great. It's the opening to my next question, how this longitudinal data can support the collaboration between stakeholders. And as you said, like, how do we get the trainers on board here? What are your experiences, Toby, Bronte, Amy, Sarah, and Davies, in terms of this collaboration? How are people reacting? And the word is open here.
We've had really good reception from our trainers. Initially, some skepticism and wanting to know how the data is going to be used. But I think once they've seen it used in the manner that we've been doing with out of competition exams and Vets List Works, we have several trainers who have adopted using it. I think we've seen a massive improvement in the soundness of those trainers' horses, because I think that's the ideal place, is right. The trainers are looking at them every day. If they're using the app routinely and can detect that change in gait pattern, and get their private vet involved before we're seeing it on a regulatory end of thing, where maybe it's gone from that mild asymmetry that we're okay with letting race, and to a point where it's changed dramatically, but because the trainer looks at the horse every day, they don't actually notice that change. So then we come in and say, hey, this horse is really different than before. So I think it's been really good for those trainers that have started to use it. And I think now we really don't see any pushback or skepticism with our population of trainers. And I think there's a lot of appreciation of the fact that I can send that data to them so they have it for their attending vet to look at, or to even send to their owners to show what's going on.
That's great to point out. So Sarah, you guys are getting the data. The trainers are doing recordings in their stables. You guys are getting the data with so let's just explain to people who haven't seen the app that you're getting a sort of full data view of this with these colored legs, but also with some quite, heavy detailed asymmetry, gait and asymmetry data. And then you guys share that back to the trainer when there is a question, or if it is a horse that needs more attention, so that they can share it with their treating vets. That's how you work around it. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
How would that work, Toby, in Saudi Arabia for you guys? How do you take the data back?
The experience has been similar. I think the paradigm has shifted somewhat. There's always that initial fear that we will perhaps try to apply a threshold and delegate our clinical acumen to the technology. We've heard that in various parts of the world. It's just not the case. You still have to put all of that information together: history, medical information, the presentation of the horse. I think going back to something that Amy was saying, I find the variation in the recordings is critical.
Yeah.
There is obviously that aspect of the application. So consistency in recording is crucial, and we can often refer to that variation to very briefly look at the consistency, and all of this is going towards, particularly around the movement of the, as Amy was talking about, horses with quadrilateral lameness. the paradigm has shifted from catastrophic injury as well. We're obviously all trying to prevent catastrophic injury, but that's the extreme end of the scale. And certainly from our perspective, it's about performance, welfare, integrity, and the trainers have really engaged in that. If a trainer can see an improvement in welfare and performance and have a happy horse, we found that they have actually been seeking out the tools and the information to get ahead of these changes as they occur. So the engagement in the main has been excellent.
And Toby, has that been different if you're looking at the population of horses that you've screened nationally or internationally? Where have you seen the biggest challenges?
There are challenges everywhere. We have different populations, even domestically, because we hold both thoroughbred and Arabian racing. Obviously, the mainstay of our population is thoroughbred horses, but we also use the tool in our Arabian racing population. When we have 12 races on the card, we'll have 10 races for thoroughbreds and 2 races for Arabians. We found the tool very useful in both populations of horses, but there are different challenges whether you're dealing domestically or internationally. But I think that the benefits far outweigh the challenges. The ability to receive those videos and multiple videos from overseas is a huge benefit.
Yeah, I think we have a very good mix here of use, because Bronte, in your community, you have sort of a quite geographically close community. You have your mainland China section, and then of course the Hong Kong section. But you guys seem to have so much communication between the regulatory side, the treating side, and the trainers. Has that made it easy for you to set up this communication, or do you still think there are challenges?
No, I think we're a very unique environment in that the clinical vets, the regulatory vets, most of the stable staff all work for the Jockey Club, and the horses move between China and Hong Kong regularly. And we, our clinical department, were very proactive and supplied a Sleip account to every trainer and encouraged them to use it. And I think, sort of speaking to David and Sarah's point, that they now rely on the app. They trust the app, and that's made it a lot easier for us now. So everyone accepts the app as a platform for communicating lameness, to the extent that recently they will start sending us, the stables will start sending us some of the results. If there's a horse we've sort of said to them, oh, this horse is sort of, we're starting to get concerned about, they'll start sending us results. Again, they've learnt that if we can see that horse's movement, see it's not changing or sometimes improving, that's a positive and a benefit for the horse, for them, and for us making the right decision.
And Amy, you come from a very old racing tradition, I guess, with a quite diverse flora of trainers. And so how do you? I know you've been then adapting. I wouldn't say slower, but you've gone through this sort of validation process, also involving the interaction between trainers and really seeing how they would feel about this. What do you think you've met so far in the community?
Been very pleasantly surprised by trainers' opinions. Where I see the main advantage to us in Britain is that our pre-race examination is really the only opportunity we get to see the horse moving apart from when it's racing, because we have such limited access to training data or treatment records. And for me, I'm hoping we can move towards a situation where Sleip is used to monitor the horses at home. And this will allow the well, maybe not the responsibility, but the first stab at assessing whether a horse is fit to race will actually move to the trainer and their own vet. And then we will just form a sort of safety net at the racecourse. And to me, that will generate better answers, because they see the horse for a much greater period of its life than we do. They know all the information, whereas we only get a snapshot. One observation I've had from a number of treating vets is that they are grateful for our interventions at times, because it allows them the access to see and treat these horses, whereas many of these horses they're not even aware of until we flag them. So I'm hoping over a long period of time we'll get to a point where Sleip is shifting the focus to monitoring at home rather than monitoring at the racecourse, which certainly here, where we're so geographically spread out and there's such a limited sharing of training data with the regulator, I think that will certainly increase the sensitivity of the pre-race exam and make it better for everybody.
That's a super interesting point, and I really hope we get to that point at in some point of time, because as you say, I think also for equestrian disciplines, there's a very, very short view of the horse that you have. Either you meet it as a treating vet in the clinic, you might have an hour or two to try to sort out quite a complicated orthopedic problem, or you are a veterinarian at an IFHA competition, and then you have a really quick trot up to look at a horse. And of course, that's not going to, it's going to prevent some things that day, but knowing the pattern is going to be so important, especially now that this gives us such a detail of the movement pattern, and we should not misinterpret that. But I think you guys have all stated very good examples of this, very cautious use. Because if you would go out and just measure a population of horses as a cross-sectional study, we know that many of these horses will be asymmetrical. And I know Bronte in the IMU studies that Dr. Pfau has made, and I think maybe you were involved, I think more than 90% of horses would look asymmetrical if you look at the thoroughbred population. But that's true also for other sports horses. So that's great. So now we've talked about the data and the data sharing, and I think you guys are really saying that the trainers are much more on board than I might have imagined when starting this. And I'm amazed by the racing community, how you seem to be willing to share this data between trainers and regulatory bodies and treating veterinarians to really, have a common discussion on how to help these individual horses the best way we can, and to pick up subtle things, and not only to regulate, but really to help in the daily management of these horses. When it comes to the global perspective, you've already said that there is some sharing of data between some of you and your jurisdictions. How do you foresee this in the future? I don't know, Sarah, can you give us a perspective maybe from the US between different jurisdictions first? Do you think sharing of data, what's the limitations? What type of buy-in do you need from these different, regions? And how would that work?
I think right now the biggest limitation on our end of things is the fact that we do have distinct racing jurisdictions, like the data that we collect here in New York, unless I specifically share it with another regulatory vet, say in Kentucky, that's not necessarily following the horse unless the trainer is providing their own data to those. So I think as hopefully more and more jurisdictions within the US get on board with using something like this, that it absolutely helps to track the horses. Like I look at our population and the sharing of horses that we have with Kentucky, or being involved with Breeders' Cup, where I can provide that data to the Breeders' Cup team from the horses that run with me normally. So I think the biggest thing right now is just getting more use of it in the US, and then figuring out how do we share that across jurisdictions without potentially upsetting, the trainers or the owners as to sharing of data.
So we do have a question here from Nigel asking about permissions to share data internationally. Do you guys know what regulates these, the permission to share data? I guess GDPR, of course, if there are humans in videos, that's important from our perspective at Sleip. But do you guys, I guess you have an international body here.
I think each jurisdiction has its own controls with that. So for a place like Hong Kong, it's obviously very easy because they run under our rules, and they kind of have to follow what we ask them to do. Places like Australia, I know they're a lot more restrictive, not from the racing jurisdictions, but from the sharing of information laws. But sort of a big picture hope that I have is, and especially to start the procedure around the world, would be for an international organisation like the IFHA that has sanctioned races around the world, that those horses have a passport, a health passport, and that all this kind of information, so previous veterinary information, previous embargoes, previous slip, trot-ups, all that sort of information follows those horses. And if you want to race in those races, you have to agree to share that passport around. I think that's really the way forward. And I guess places like Australia, Toby and Saudi now, we're kind of doing that within a number of jurisdictions, but I think there's great potential for that to go worldwide.
It's great. Nigel Hazelden here in the Q&A, he has the same suggestion as you, Bronte. Should it be a condition to enter the race, and then that's it. That's great. Any other comments from you guys, Toby or Amy? Or
I think it's sorry to jump in. I agree with Bronte. From a jurisdictional standpoint, lots of places are doing this within the confines and the challenges that they have. It's obviously a requirement to come and race here and in various international race meetings, and some of the way that we get around that is it's a requirement of the stable initially to make those submissions, and then we have the approved veterinary inspections before the horses depart, and that then extends. So it is part of our rules of racing domestically that we can require certain inspections, certain submissions. I think Bronte's right. We're very much at the beginning of this as we seek to move to harmonisation around the world. Some of that information within the legalities is being shared now, but we'd seek to see that extend for a lot longer. So I think that's the goal. Is as Sarah,
you're hearing from the audience here. Lynn Hillier is actually saying that there is a project exploring this. Thank you so much, Lynn, from the IGSRV. That's really great. As a researcher, I'm again super excited about what you could do with this data, because as you guys have pointed out really clearly, and we want to say that from Sleip's side as well, that this is gait analysis data. It gives you a very detailed view of the biomechanics of the motion pattern. But of course, being able to change management based on this, I think changing regulations is one thing, and we can help out. And I think you guys are really showing that the regulatory bodies in racing are making a great effort here also to communicate with the community and to help horses on the yards, not only on the racing sites. Davies, I'm excited to hear from you. How do you see this type of data? Because potentially you guys could be building these huge databases, which I would love as a researcher. I would have loved to know more management factors or have even more data. And you work with biometrics in general. How do you see this growing, and how could the racing community at large be helped by this type of data being fused?
Yeah, so some thoughts that we have had, whether it's in race tracking, in training tracking, as they're breezing or working, and then using Sleip or these AI tools, is being able to create a holistic profile or a holistic baseline in all these different aspects of the horse's life and how they're living. And through that inventory of on track and, as we were discussing, the shareability, whether through management, through regulatory vets, through trainers themselves, how can we create a picture of what we currently have on property and how we can build off of that moving forward to create the most competitive races, to create the most healthy participants, if that makes sense. So it's just, as a whole, it's our ethical obligation, but at the end of the day, it's just good sport and what we can do to uphold our obligation for these horses at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think coming a bit again from the equestrian sports, that if regulatory bodies can work like this with providing data that can actually help trainers in their regular day. And today we haven't invited any race like thoroughbred trainers here, but we do have some clients at Sleip that are race trainers that use Sleip in a version that is not for veterinary diagnostic use, but that we call a gait monitoring version of Sleip, where they do work with it in their own hands. And I think we have a question here in the Q&A asking exactly that about the NYRA, that, when you guys at NYRA are using it and a trainer will be recording their horse, it's actually you who have a Sleip account, and that's like a veterinary diagnostic account. They would potentially be doing recordings at home in the stable. So the trainer will be doing that. You guys get the data. But again, there is this other version of Sleip that's called the gait monitoring version that the race trainers themselves could be using.
That's what they're using, yes.
Yes, and then that would hopefully make the collaboration with the trainer and their yard vets much easier as well. So I think Amy was saying really neatly that the treating veterinarians are often very happy to get this sort of extra attention on some of the individuals that they might not be seeing otherwise. And I think for me, this would be the beautiful fusion that they would rather see the data in the stable quite regularly, and maybe together with training data, training physiology data, of course, would be extremely interesting to add to this. And then the right horses would get the right type of veterinary attention at the right time. I think that would be very, very, very useful.
Yeah, and as Sarah mentioned before, especially with claiming, we're seeing these tools be used quite a bit with, a handful of trainers, because claiming is, a big game here in the United States. But once a new connections have, a new horse, they immediately can be familiarize themselves and have that longitudinal baseline of progression of getting comfortable with each horse. Horses that go to the farms, come back, new 2-year-olds, whatever that may be. We're seeing a lot of excitement with that.
That's great. We're still going to wrap up, but guys, I wanted to ask you one last question, and maybe we can do a roundtable on this one. So if you could change one thing, technical, cultural, or regulatory, to better support welfare and sound decision-making in racing, what would that be? A bit of a huge question, I guess. And who's the brave person who wants to go first?
I don't mind going first. I think from a British perspective, that where we see the biggest potential is more information about training data and openness and trust between trainers and vets and learning from each other. We've got a long way to go, but that's where we see the biggest potential, and it's where our risk modelling indicates the greatest potential for improvement in race risk is.
Wonderful, Amy. Bronte, do you want to?
I'll jump in second. Yeah, I agree. I think the biggest potential for us is to move away from the pre-race examination as the decision-making time to that being more within training. I think having a single decision-making time just before a race limits our ability to make the right decision. I think if ownership of that decision is taken up more by the stable vets, the trainers, the work riders, and even the regulators during training, that's where I see there's a big potential for us to improve.
That's great. So, Bronte, would you foresee horses traveling then? They would, of course, still be examined before the race because acute things can always happen, I guess. But the biggest would be captured at other times.
I think you certainly need that examination before the race, if for nothing else, for the integrity and the confidence in racing. But I think certainly in Hong Kong here, who have had a very strong regulatory service way before I was here, we've sort of reached a point where we need to find another level to help reduce our injury rates, and I think we'll find that in monitoring horses in training, which has to be a collaborative procedure.
Yeah. So, Toby, do you want to add what will you be, or one thing to change?
One thing is difficult. I would agree wholeheartedly with what's already been said, and I think the shift from single time points to looking at cumulative workload is crucial. The research is showing that. I'd probably go a little bit more left field and say, and this discussion extends to that, is traceability. Traceability is everything. So this data can play a role in traceability, but traceability before, during, and after a horse's career.
And Sarah, do you want to add to this?
Definitely echo what's been said. I agree with Bronte in that, extending out when we're actually making decisions on these horses. And we've seen a massive change in watching the training on these horses, obviously with our population being very much centered at racetracks, unlike potentially in the UK where they're spread all over, the ability of us to keep eyes on those horses and hopefully get earlier intervention. So.
So actually shifting not only to regulatory interventions, but really to preventive interventions, which sounds beautiful. Davies, you want to add to this? What would be your wish?
I guess nothing necessarily to add to, as all these doctors have mentioned, but I guess from my end, the more trainers that are willing to be a part of this movement, the better for all of us. So I'll leave it at that.
Great. Thank you so much, guys. I'm so honored that all of you wanted to come, and also grateful for all the participants that joined us today. I'm amazed by the work that the racing industry is doing here, and the sort of braveness to implement this type of technology. I know there's also other technology that can be fused and support, and that we can potentially shift from being quite reactive in this sport to being much more proactive. So thank you so much. Wonderful to hear this great discussion, and yeah, we'll be in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Thank you.